Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY video. We're going to start out here in the workshop and then a little bit later we're going to head up aboard Athena. This week I want to get started on my little 9 kilowatt DIY diesel generator here. By going the DIY route compared to an off-the-shelf model, I'm saving somewhere right around $8,000 US. The heart of the generator is going to be this itty bitty Perkins here. It's a 2-cylinder 0.5 liter Perkins 402 to be exact. That, through the magic of infernal combustion and dinosaur squeezings, will power this 9.5 kVA 2-poled brushed alternator and provide us with glorious 230 volts AC. The itty bitty Perkins came out of Mr. Cement Boat Guy's smaller fiberglass boat. I personally helped pull it out of there this winter. It doesn't have a lot of hours on it, so hopefully it'll provide us with years worth of angry pixies. The setup aboard Athena is going to be pretty much identical to this, which is for the cement boat, although this is a slightly larger alternator. And as you can see, it's belt driven, and there's actually one or two good reasons for that. For one, it's going to be a lot easier to build this. Alignment is not going to be as much of an issue when using belts compared to something like a flexible shaft coupling. Also, with a belt-driven setup, I have the option of changing the gearing slightly, meaning I can run the engine at either slightly higher or slightly lower RPM. For Mr. Alternator to spit out 50 Hz, which is what I want, the shaft here needs to be spinning at 3000 RPM, but the engine might sound better at slightly lower or slightly higher RPM. Hopefully we'll get a chance to fire this guy up a little bit later in the video and figure that out. And that's where it might be nice to be able to introduce a little bit of gearing, but like I said, we'll try and figure that out a little bit later in the video. On a fun side note, although the two alternators look almost identical, Martin's here is a 4-pole version where mine is a 2-pole version. That means his needs to run at about half the speed of mine to put out the 50 Hz. Now his is voltage regulated by a capacitor, where mine is voltage regulated by AVR. So even though they look very similar, they are also slightly different. And just like that, all of the pieces for the puzzle are cut. Now I do need one more piece actually, but we'll get back to that a little bit later. The next step is to remove the old mounting bracket here. It's a good thing the itty bitty Perkins weighs in at a mere 57 kilos or 126 pounds. I've carefully placed some plywood here underneath the oil pan to hopefully not put any pressure on the drain plug. Let's see how this goes. And there she is in her naked glory. The only thing that's left for me to do before I can move on to welding is to drill 4 holes in each of these two. I'll just grab the measurements off of the old one and transfer those to the new one. So far, so good. I just stepped outside with Mr. Plasma Cutter and cut that last piece I needed, and that piece goes right here. So that means we're ready to start welding. My plan is to tag this back piece here in place, then I can go ahead and remove this from the engine. Then I can attach these two doohickeys, so yep, let's get started. The good news is that Mr. Generator is now standing on his own 4 feet. He's basically ready to get fired up. The bad news is that the tachometer we've got here at the workshop is broken. Martin is trying to see if he can get his hands on another one, and if he's successful, then I can figure out what RPM I want to run the itty bitty Perkins at, and I can move ahead with the generator build. But while we're waiting to hear back from Martin, let's move on to something completely different. I've already done a little bit of work this week to the head here aboard Athena off camera. As you can see, the main bulkhead looked a little bit rough around the edges. I made a couple of paper templates, and then I used those to cut some pieces of 4mm plywood. After a quick test fit of all the pieces, it was time to give the bulkhead a bit of oh glorious sanding. I mixed up some thickened epoxy and adhered the 4mm plywood in place and temporarily secured it with some screws. I think visually that made a huge difference here in the head, but more importantly, now that I've got this plywood in place, I can go ahead and make the template for the countertop. This is compact laminate, and this is more than likely what we're going to use for the little vanity in the head and also here in the galley. Compact laminate is durable, reasonably scratch resistant, it doesn't rot, and there's absolutely no maintenance. And it's also slightly cheaper than Corian, for instance. Even though this stuff is not as expensive as Corian, it's still far from free. That plus the fact that I have to make a hole for the undermounted sink, well, I think a template is well worth the time. For the template, I want a material that's relatively easy to work with, yet hard enough that I can use it as a guide for a flush trimming bit on my router. I've got some 6mm MDF here. That should be basically perfect. A strip that's 40 centimeters should give me plenty to work with. And now if I can just remove a little bit of material over here, this should be able to just slide in. It looks like this is around 24 centimeters, so let's remove a little bit less than that. This is not going to be a perfect fit, but that's on purpose. All I wanted to do was to make sure I could get the template here in there so I can trace the line of the bulkhead onto it. After a little bit of fiddling about, I've gotten a reasonably good fit. As you might be able to see, there are areas back here where there's just the tiniest of a hair gap, but this is perfectly okay. Next step is to get this trimmed so that it matches the shape of the sink cover. I don't know if my sink cover here is a perfect match for the curvature of the sink, so rather than relying on that to cut the shape, I'm going to use the little template that was provided by the manufacturer of the sink. This little template will also provide me with a perfectly shaped inner hole, so yeah, it's very convenient that they included this. This was a little bit fiddly, but I think I've finally gotten this lined up perfect. If not, then my mistake is somewhere on this piece of masking tape. I'll remove the center of this template and then I'll use that to create the hole, and then to get the perfect curvature on the outside here, I'll just use a compass or something to trace a line onto this. So yeah, let's get to cutting. To be honest, I don't know how this is going to work out because I've got some pretty tight tolerances here. So yeah, let's just cross our fingers and give it a go. I still have to smooth out the edges here a little bit, but let's just see if I'm way off on this or not. That is basically perfect. I used a compass to trace the outline onto the outer edge of the MDF, so let's see how this looks. Fingers crossed. Nice! I am thoroughly pleased with that. No doubt the astute amongst you will have noted that the sink is actually not perfectly centered. It's a little bit wider here than back here. That's because I'm considering adding a little fillet here, a little bit of wood trim. Now that would mean that the amount of room that's here and here are going to be the same, and I think that's what's visually important, but otherwise I can always trim this later on. It's going to be a while until I actually order the compact laminate because I'm going to need quite a bit of it. Although the vanity is pretty small, we're also going to need some for the galley here and for the big kitchen island that's going to be here in the center of the boat. And I think it is just going to be cheaper to go with a full sheet. The fact that I have to wait a little bit to order the stuff until I know the dimensions of the kitchen island is probably a good thing, because that gives me a bit of time to figure out something very important, which is the color of the stuff. I was just going to go with the black, the same stuff I used for the original galley here aboard Athena, but Ava seems to be leaning more towards a light gray, so we're probably going to go with that. Good morning, guys. It is a glorious Sunday morning. Yesterday, after finishing the template for the Vanity and the head, Martin and I actually got the little Perkins fired up. In the clip I'm about to show you, she might sound super loud, but that is mainly because there is absolutely no muffling on the exhaust, as you can see, and also there is no air filter. So once everything is finished, she'll be a lot more quiet. Using this cheapo tachometer, we checked the engine at 2800, 3000 and 3200 RPM, and there was no difference in the way the engine sounded, and more importantly, there was no vibrations depending on the RPM. For the next little test, Martin wanted to see what happened if we introduced a little bit of load in a somewhat crude fashion to the engine. The goal of this was to see if the governor kept the RPMs reasonably stable or if there was a large fluctuation. As you can see, without actually overloading the engine, the RPM only dropped about 100, 150, and that's exciting because that means we might be able to get away with just relying on the governor for controlling RPM rather than building some kind of elaborate electronic controller. And that's exciting because there is a strong argument for keeping things as simple as you possibly can. Now, I do want to add a controller to start and stop the generator, but that is a story for another time. Before I can finish the generator, I need just a few more parts. For instance, the belt that's actually going to connect the alternator to the engine. The good news is that we already have a lot of stuff. There's the heat exchanger. We also have the two pulley wheels. In fact, for this one right here, all I need is just a slightly larger taper lock and we're good to go. The taper lock that's in here now is 25 millimeters and the shaft is 28. So yeah, there's no amount of lube that's going to make that an enjoyable experience. I was planning on mounting the heat exchanger back here, but Martin pointed out that it might be better located over here, right here underneath the alternator, because that way you can easily get to the sink anode here. That would be pretty awesome. The astute might have noted that the oil filter in here is a little bit difficult to get to, but fear not. The oil filter will get moved off of the engine to somewhere where it's a little bit more convenient to get to. So I think we've figured out all of the major stuff here. All I need is just a few more parts. Once I've gotten everything hooked up, the plan is to use Athena's new induction cooktop and the electric oven to introduce a little bit of load to test the generator. Maybe we could cook a delicious diesel-fired frozen pizza while testing. That would be kind of cool. And right there, you've also seen one of the reasons why I'm putting a diesel generator aboard Athena. There's just not enough surface area aboard her to cover her in solar panels that's going to produce enough energy to power the stuff we want to use. Induction cooktop, electric oven, dive compressor, water maker, washer dryer. These are all high energy consumption devices that we need to figure out a way of powering. And for us, that answer is going to be the itty bitty diesel generator. How much we'll actually have to run the generator still remains to be seen, because we will have a couple of solar panels and also a tow generator for when underway. But certainly having another source of energy is never a bad thing. And like I said, those solar panels, they're definitely not going to cover our needs. Right about now is probably the time when somebody's going to comment, but wait, Mess, why don't you just go simple? Go without electricity at all? Well, for the same reason you don't hardly ever see a house without running water or electricity nowadays. It might be simple, but that doesn't equal enjoyable. If that simple lifestyle without electricity or running water is your cup of tea, then that's fine, more power to you. But for me, I've lived 5 years aboard a 30-foot sailboat without running water or, for instance, a washer-dryer, and I've arrived at the conclusion that having a washer-dryer is preferable to not having one, at least for me. One last quick little generator-related note here. I'm sure some of you are wondering how I'm going to tension the belts. This will pull and this will push. Now, hopefully you guys will get to see this in action next week. Moving on to something that is more essential for sailing, I've got these two exciting looking packages. Oh, what might this interesting looking doohickey be? These two doohickeys are clearly just a couple of bearings, and this thing is a new one of this. Old doohickeys and new doohickeys. A while back I took apart Athena's steering pedestal, and now I've finally got the spare parts for it. I can get everything cleaned up and put back together. I'm waiting to hear back from a guy that's gonna hopefully help me fabricate a new one of these. This old aluminum one here is a corroded piece of mess. The new one is gonna be spiffy stainless steel, and it's gonna go right here. I'm going to hold off a little bit on putting the pedestal back together. That way I can have it be in the title of a video, because there's a lot of boats out there with these old Cobra steering pedestals. I'm pretty sure someone out there would enjoy seeing me put it back together so that they know how to take theirs apart. I am incredibly excited to get the generator up and running, and I'll do my very best to get my hands on all the parts I need to make that happen next week. Now, in case that doesn't happen, I could always work on the pedestal, and I also do have a couple of port lights here aboard Athena that I want to seal up. So yeah, there's lots of exciting stuff for next week's video. Before ending this video, I want to mention, in case you've got kids or maybe grandkids that's sort of the preschool age range, Ava started uploading videos to YouTube where she reads books, sings, and does activities. And maybe your kids could use a little bit of a diversion from the whole shelter-at-home situation. So I'll include a link for her channel down in the description, and also pop out one of those newfangled YouTube cards.